So the six sensual heavens. These represent a particularly fascinating domain within Buddhist cosmology that remains obscure to many hearers or students. One frequently encounters the mistaken claim that Buddhism lacks concepts of paradise or perdition, as if those are purely Christian inventions. But if you look further, you study things, you notice things like the Bhava Chakra, the Wheel of Samsara, and if you really look into the scriptures, the suttas, when you examine the intricate specifications of these six distinct sensuous heavens, you realize what they are. So these are real places, they're not just symbols. Early Christianity offers very sparse descriptions on heaven and hell, regarding the afterlife, but by comparison, Buddhism provides very explicit details on both worlds, in all the realms, all the six realms. It's a very comprehensive map that you can find in the scripture. And they illustrate these various tiers of the sensory celestial planes with immense precision. So it's helpful to clarify why the label of sensuous heavens is applied in this case. Now, in this specific range of existence, they perceive, or rather, it receives this name because these heavens exist within the boundary of desire, which also encompasses the human world and the various lower states. So these are the first levels of heaven that are still based on sense experience, or sense perception, rather. The five senses and maybe a bit more. So these would be form heavens as well. It's similar to the human plane, but just much more lighter and much more blissful. So this bandwidth of nature, it differentiates from the loftier realms of the pure form or formlessness that transcend physical cravings. Now, entities here, the entities that reappear within these sensory skies partake in very luxurious comforts, and they possess bodies that are remarkably beautiful. And this physical refinement increases like a sharpening blade as you travel through the six distinct levels of these sensual heavens. These beings, these gods, are described to be inconceivably beautiful. So their beauty is so magnificent that we can't actually see it. We can't comprehend it. As ordinary humans, we don't understand. But I'm sure in states of jhana, in different higher states of meditation, it's possible to understand the beauty of these heavens, both what it's like to live there and what these gods appear as. We talked about this in some previous lectures about how certain most beings can't perceive dimensions above them. They can only perceive their own level, typically. Or if they try to perceive a higher dimension, it looks different to them. It looks, usually there's a limited appearance and way it feels. So a heaven could actually appear like a prison for someone like a scoundrel right? Just like in that story, the scoundrel who snuck into the Naga heaven, it didn't look like a Naga heaven at all. And you couldn't even eat the food there. And it's like the fish in the sea, even if they can cross into the physical world, they can't stay there for very long. They can't breathe the air, and their vision is limited. And especially with the deep sea creatures, they don't even have eyes. They can't even see. Now, it's not always about crude excess, because these are not crude sensory realms, right? They are very subtle. So what reigns here as well are emotional states of joy and bliss and satisfaction, and they're filtered through these sensory channels. And furthermore, these beings encounter almost none of the typical human agonies that we do, like illness or the decay of the body. So when they reach the conclusion of their incredibly vast lifespans, there are actually 5 distinct signs that manifest that serve as a brief prelude to their passing. So what happens is their clothing begins to wrinkle or crinkle. Their floral wreaths lose their bloom, while their bodies produce sweat. I guess it says their armpits get sweaty in particular. But I mean, other places can sweat too. Why not, right? And they grow restless as well in their sleep. And their natural brilliance also starts to dim. So this serves as their version of the aging process, which is still substantially less painful and difficult than our enduring conditions like rheumatism or cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, and immune decline. And then when you see these signs, departure follows very shortly thereafter and manifests simply as the vanishing of these beings, which is identical to how they arrive. They just appear here and they disappear. So back to sex that exists at this level. They do have sex and it looks similar to the way we do, but this isn't how they reproduce. And I've learned that it is penetrative sex. It's very similar to ours, and the genders are more or less still divided. But these levels are, so they're partitioned into male and female identities. They still have the gender, and this is very different than the Brahma realm, which I'll get into in the next lecture. Even more subtle, less form. And so they don't create the offspring through this act. They just enjoy pleasure from this. But I would imagine they couldn't possibly have the amount of lust that we do. Otherwise, they just would not exist. You cannot bring these heavy, crude animal passions into heaven. So it's although it might look similar or feel similar, the actual emotions that are circulating are much lighter. It's bliss, it's not passion that they're experiencing. And a major point of curiosity in Western thought regarding the Christian afterlife is whether physical intimacy exists. And many people jokingly suggest that if not, they don't want to go to heaven, actually. They'd rather not. So, the Buddhist doctrine addresses this topic directly regarding the lower celestial tiers, Because while the Brahma realms move past this messy biological functions, the sensory heavens still retain distinct, as I said, sex or genders. And there's very compelling text detailing how sexuality evolves across these heights, actually. And this serves as a mirror for all other pleasures becoming more sophisticated as you ascend. So you might even observe a terrestrial equivalent to this through the varying levels of human emotional closeness. So now whether actual intercourse occurs, it depends on the specific level. Within the first two heavens, known as the Katumahara Jika and the Tavatimsa, there's still a connection to the physical world. And this is situated upon Mount Meru or Sineru. And these entities unite physically, much like humans do, with the sole exception that the male does not release any bodily fluid. And perhaps they don't even have that climactic orgasm either, neither parties. I'm assuming because, I don't think they would have that and not release seminal fluid or sexual fluids. So they reside on Mount Sineru, and these beings engage in, as I said, so when they're doing this, an energetic transition occurs instead, because there's no reproduction process in this activity. And this represents the final tier involving physical penetration, because within the Yama heaven, which sits as the initial level suspended above the mountain, the entities embrace and touch each other without any invasive contact. They successfully derive a polished satisfaction from these gestures. And within the Tusita heaven, first they simply hold each other. They just they hold hands and they gaze into each other's eyes. But in the fifth celestial realm, they merely exchange glances. They gaze into each other's eyes and they smile without any tactile connection. With touching. And they reach a state of pure rapture that way. And then at the peak of these sensory domains, they simply watch each other. They gaze into each other's eyes without smiling. And they get that gratification, the sexual gratification just from that. And I suspect that this mutual observation lasts for a very long time because their lifespans are remarkably vast. So it could be that one encounter could last perhaps a couple dozen years or so, maybe 100 years. And so this allows for prolonged states of enchantment. You might even compare these interactions with music, because music can range from very loud, coarse, rhythmic beats and that strike a basic chord and a strong melody and lots of repetition, right? But that heavy beat and rhythm with the melody and the speed and the loudness and the dynamics. And then when you look at artists, some of them are much more refined in their composing. And there are intricate layers of a symphony, which is all melodic, and there is no, in some compositions like ambient music, there are no drums and there is no percussion. It's just textures, very subtle, just melodies, sometimes not even just sounds, textures, not even melodies. But I think this distinction matters because it reveals something important about desire, which is that we often view desire in an overly simplistic in terms, but as you move through the celestial tiers, sensory experience steadily thins and becomes more elegant. And by the time you reach the pinnacle, it requires only a very small shift to move past sensuality entirely. So we'll examine the states beyond this later, which are truly non-sensory, which don't involve visuals or audible sensations or scent or flavors or textures, tactile sensations, or even concepts. But these even more sophisticated, refined realms offer yet even greater joy and longer lives. So it's hard to imagine being so consumed and attached to the physical world. But Buddhism doesn't intend to dampen happiness or joy. It just highlights that increasingly superior and more refined pleasures do exist, and they are less and less material and sensory based as you go up. And that deep meditation allows you to move beyond these crude levels that we're so used to. Now, many people wonder why visitors to a monastery follow 8 precepts, including the avoidance of music and dance and sensory luxuries like scents or jewelry. But, these activities aren't inherently wicked. They just tend to be incompatible with the growth of a truly heightened mind. And also, it's just the way that, again, it's the level of indulgence. It's the way that we indulge in things with attachment, and we have a crude taste. We want the really hard, fast beats. We want loud. We want dynamics. We want, heavy. We want bass music. We want to turn up the bass. We want it to be really loud. We want the dancing to provoke lust. We want it to be like arousing, sexually arousing. And so it's all very passionate. But yet there are levels to music and there are levels to dancing. So sensory indulgence acts like a distraction that coarsens your focus and blocks that transition into deeper states. It's good to get used to, becoming lighter and trying out, like texture-based music and finer kinds of music and different kinds of dance or traditional dances to get an understanding of what it's like to enjoy those, to sincerely enjoy the pleasures of more traditional and refined music. So these, the music that's been growing, the modern era of pop culture and all that, it has just been anchoring our mind to the base level of human craving. And it's only by rising above that we can get a taste of what it could be like to live in a sensory heaven. So, which are in fact more ecstatic or ecstatic. And, it's one monk, I know of a monk who said that the people who don't have the subtle pleasures, who don't have loving kindness developed, of course, are still anchored and still turn to crude sensory pleasures because they don't have anything else, right? So you have to find it and get used to, and you have to develop a higher taste. You have to develop loving kindness. Loving kindness, when it's high enough in its culmination, is the first jhana, which is incredible rapture or bliss. That's what we need to experience. And because when we get a taste of that, then we know what else more is out there, and we can go beyond. You might find that, so once you reach these superior states through meditation, those old physical cravings can lose their luster. So a student might be pretty startled to find that their former fixations simply fade away because of how nice the jhanas can be. So let's examine these entities further. They're apparently remarkable, stunning in their beauty, and they certainly possess flawless proportions, and they emit a brilliant a light, a radiance, and they're draped in beautiful robes and exquisite jewelry. That's why when they come down to the physical world, they often they can't easily be seen because they're so radiant and bright. They just light up the whole forest. Or a grove of a forest, or a river valley. The males are described as eternally maintaining the appearance of a 25-year-old by our metrics, and the females remain about 16. And I guess these ages just reflect what we I imagine as the pinnacle of physical grace and development, where you have the maximum kind of appearance of beauty and youth before the maturing and the aging begins to occur. I mean, according to ancient Indian culture. Now, the initial celestial tier known as Yama Deva resembles an eternal garden celebration. So it's a garden celebration lasting 1 million years. And a lot of people find this vision quite alluring, especially since Western afterlife descriptions are often vague or unappealing. The Buddhist version appears very charming and relatable, a relatable alternative. You might ask what provides the momentum to reach these destinations. And the primary engine is the cultivation of merit, specifically through the pillar of charity and the observance of the 5 ethical guidelines, the 5 precepts. And so in Vimana Vatu, which archives accounts of the heavenly spheres, it illustrates how these beings created their destiny through specific acts of kindness. So this serves as a direct reflection of the hungry ghost realm, where earthly transgressions result in that equivalent misery. And these heavens, that reward mirrors the gift. So, for example, a person who offered lotus blossoms might reside in a manor encircled by shimmering lily ponds. There is a story of a woman who donated a lamp to a temple, and consequently, her celestial form radiated a magnificent constant light. Now, regarding their memories, these beings generally retain a recollection of their previous human existence. They can typically remember their most recent life, though not the ones nothing before that. And this clarity likely exists because their transition is not violent, whereas human birth is a significant shock. A human must endure 9 months of gestation, followed by the crisis of birth and years of helpless infancy. But it's no surprise that such a long, mute struggle erases previous memories. These celestial beings simply materialize in their full maturity. They stand within a palace, and they're surrounded by servants and finery. there is no physical distress to trigger a loss of memory. There's also a notable account of a monk who pushed himself too far during a meditative walk, or perhaps a traditional meditation. I'm sure it was a regular sitting meditation. He must have entered the jhanas, and he passed away during this. It could be that as they describe in the jhanas, your heart will stop when you enter, I guess, a certain level of samadhi, I suppose. The breathing stops, right? Because breathing is a thorn for one of the jhanas. It could be that he actually stopped breathing, and he passed away only to reappear in a heavenly villa. And so he was a little bit horrified by this, because the resident dancers informed him that his monastic life had ended and he was now a deity, he was now a god. And so he was appalled because he had no desire just to earn this luxury. So he only wanted to do the work, and now he's stuck here and for a long time, and it's going to be very inconducive for him to continue working because he's in bliss. That's something to be very aware of, is that it's very hard to work as a nirvani, as a god, perhaps even a demigod. The dimension is not conducive for spiritual work. It's too easy. The ordeals are too easy. You live too long. It's too easy to fall into temptation. So anyway, within the monastic community, specifically aiming for these sensory paradises, it's viewed as a minor transgression or a spiritual failure. It's really just a secondary consolation prize for those who fail to reach full liberation. Another tale describes a man who accidentally caught sight of these deities during their brief visit to Earth, and he became obsessed with her, just enchanted by her beauty. So he was so taken aback by her that he died just from looking at her, from her splendor. And so it's because it's beyond our capacity. The human mind can't process it. So it's probably safer to avoid even a fleeting look at such radiance. The human world looks degraded and coarse, primitive to their level, I'm sure. Looking back at their level. Now, what's fascinating is the acharas, those still performers, those dancers, as they represent a bridge between these worlds, actually. And so regarding the interaction between the human domain and the heavens, these beings do descend, though they typically remain hidden from the ordinary eye. Humans might perceive them solely as a brilliant radiance, just a enormous glow. So one account describes, as I said, deities visiting the Buddha in a mountain cavern, and the glow was so intense that the villagers below feared the peak was ablaze, that it was on fire, the forest fire. But these visitors frequently arrived at the Jaitavana monastery, and they illuminated the entire grounds. So these encounters usually took place between about 10 a.m. and 2 a.m. and following the Buddha's sessions with humans. So now, while these deities possess beauty and past virtue, they frequently lack genuine wisdom. So even though most are not really, they're not fully enlightened, that's for sure. They're just nirvanis, they're gods. They're not necessarily bodhisattvas. And some occasionally achieve the stage of stream entry, but it's a very rare thing. And their lack of exposure to suffering means that the core teachings often fail to strike them as important or relevant. So when the Buddha discusses impermanence within these realms, finally that gets to them. They recoil in terror, in disappointment, and shock. They may not have the concept of suffering, but the idea that they could disappear and stop living in this realm and go somewhere lower is terrifying to them. And the news of their own eventual passing, so it triggers this existential panic. It's remarkably easy for them to overlook their mortality, as some may have never witnessed death, right? And certain groups of these beings are even under the delusion that they are immortal. And consequently, hearing the Buddha speak of their inevitable departure, it comes as a very profound jolt to them. This stands in very stark contrast to Western concepts of an everlasting paradise or an eternal lake of damnation. So thankfully, in the Buddhist view, neither state lasts forever. Moving further up the celestial ladder, the Yama realm sits as the third elevation, the second level, Tavatimsa. This is the highest point physically connected to our world, resting on top of Mount Sineru at an altitude of about 84,000 yojanas. The Yama heaven floats another 84,000 yojanas above that peak. And each subsequent realm doubles the distance of the one below it. And in fact, this is congruent with the Kabbalah tree of life, the Jewish Kabbalah tree of life. Each sphere is twice the density as the previous one. When you descend the spheres of the tree of life, the laws, the cosmic laws double. So the following tier sits at 168,000 yojanas. Every level serves as a more polished mirror of the preceding one, and it shares similar landscapes. Each contains a central pleasure, or a central pleasure garden known as the Nandana Grove. And this becomes progressively more magnificent with every transition. And while specific details on the Yama world are sparse, it's significant for being the first level detached from Earth, that it's the first to be entirely tranquil. While the lower Tavatimsa heaven still experiences friction and combat with the Asuras, this higher plane marks the beginning of a completely peaceful territory. So they're entirely tranquil. And then the following elevation is Tusita heaven, which is a significant location because it serves as the residence for bodhisattvas during their final existence before attaining Buddhahood. And having perfected the 10 virtues throughout a long spiritual career, the future Buddha, uses this realm as a period of repose before assuming their final role. Now, Mateya, the individual destined to be the next Buddha, currently resides in Tusita. He is presently waiting there for his eventual human rebirth. And while this data might seem obscure to some of us, it's common knowledge across Asia. In the West, where people might only attend a short mindfulness or loving-kindness retreat, these specifics are rarely discussed. It's very esoteric, but nonetheless very profound to consider that the next bodhisattva is already existing simultaneously within this framework. And Vimana Bhattu shares a story of a devout layman on his deathbed. As monks chanted for him, he suddenly shouted for them to wait. And the monks, assuming they were being addressed, they dismissed themselves and departed. But when his confused family questioned why he drove them away, he actually explained that he wasn't speaking to them or the monks. He was actually addressing the deities. There were 6 celestial chariots hovering above in the air above him, and they were representing of each 6 heavens, which, with each driver inviting him to their specific realm. He asked his daughter which destination he should choose, and she advised him to choose the Tusita heaven, because this is where the Bodhisattva lives. And that's where you can get your opportunity to continue the work. So when he tossed the floral wreath toward the Tusita carriage, though the onlookers could not see the vehicle, they saw the flowers hanging suspended in midair. And he passed away instantly and was whisked away to that 4th heaven. It's noteworthy why a bodhisattva favors this 4th tier over the lower, more indulgent realms or the levels above it. The name Tusita signifies contentment. So it's suggesting that a peak of peaceful satisfaction where sensory delights are exceptionally delicate. They're very subtle. So it lacks the heavier, coarser nature of the preceding planes. The level above that is the Nimara Naurati realm, which are home. It's home to those who find joy in creation. This refers to the ability to manifest whatever you desire through mental focus. But if they envisioned a grand estate filled with flora or a majestic carriage, so if you do that, this simply appears. And in the lower spheres, while palaces and gardens materialize magically, they're passive results of past karma. They're not really being created through the concentration. Beings at the 5th level, however, possess very potent merit that they can consciously direct it to shape their own reality. So they essentially wield the ultimate power of imagination. And this is a very unique gift because, as one might not realize that, you may not realize that not every person possesses that capacity for such a vivid mental imagination. Many people require the actual tangible objects and the descriptions and pictures and things because they lack that capacity to really envision and experience something and immerse themselves in it. So it is a unique faculty. It can be developed, it can be cultivated, it can grow weaker, and it can grow stronger. And so readers and artists are capable of constructing these domains within their own minds without needing a literal physical trigger. This often makes them appear mysterious. Some observers wonder how composers or authors manage to pull off such worlds of from nothing. Authors like Tolkien, for example, all these like fantasy writers. So it originates purely from their creative faculty. This places that specific mental state at the 5th elevation, the realm of creation. But, however, you should not assume that simply working in the arts automatically guarantees a celestial destination. This ability must be paired with integrity and likely a spirit of charity. It should be pure. The imagination should be pure. There should be charity, and you don't want the skandhas or samskaras getting in the way and creating delusional, perverse formations, right? Perverted imagination, perverted fantasy. So it involves dedicating your artistic talents to the service of higher truths, to the service of others, and to do this with a pure mind, with virtue. In most significant religious traditions, art functions not just as an ultimate goal, but as a vehicle for expressing these very profound realities. And that specific motivation might be what leads to heavenly tear, these heavenly tears. It also relates to our faculty of perception. As ordinary humans, our awareness is heavily restricted by incoming sensory data. And yet, if you study how consciousness operates, you realize that we are constantly constructing the reality we inhabit. So we never truly encounter the external world directly. There is something going on that we have to perceive and receive with our sensory signals. And our perceptions build a simulation. Our brain creates an interpretation, right? Even what we see it gets flipped upside down and then flipped upright for us to understand. The brain flips it upright. So it's all based on perception. We're not seeing reality. We're just creating reality in our minds. And during sleep, our dreams are less restricted, however. When we dream, we're touching a state of consciousness that's very similar to the Nimana Orati level, because I believe the other celestial tiers exist somewhere in the middle. They sit between waking and dreaming, where perception is increasingly liberated until reaching that Nimana Orati stage. And at that point, beings possess total mastery over their environment, and they can shape their world through sheer intent and will, or concentration, willpower and imagination. It's remarkably similar to the experience of lucid dreaming. And finally, there's one last elevation. You might wonder what could possibly surpass the power of pure mental manifestation, but this is the 6th level, the paranimitta vasavati, which belongs to those who take joy in the creation of others. These don't even need to perform the work of imagining. Deities from the Nimana Orati serve them and generate delights on their behalf without even needing a formal command. And it's said that these servants intuitively understand how to satisfy their superiors, just like a royal chef knows his master's preferred dishes. They're in an exact parallel to an aristocracy that enjoys fine architecture and art without ever getting their own, without even doing their own work and doing it themselves, just with the labor of construction. I mean, without their own like grunt work, but the construction of others. So these resemble the human hierarchy of high-level connoisseurs who simply appreciate the finest results. It's a very compelling exercise for people to reflect on how such states would actually function.